Welcome back. It's Niners Nightly on a Friday. Hope everybody's having a great week. Off-season rolling, combine rolling. DB's working out today. Big nasties go tomorrow. By the way, we're going to 7 o'clock tonight, and then Big Dietz steps in, Dieter Kurtenbach, taking your phone calls at 808 KNBR. But we go to the UMA guest line for Brad Graham, who is our guest tonight, and really excited to have this guy on with us. He's the big dog at the SF Niners on YouTube, on Instagram, on of course X. You can catch him. Brad Graham covers the 49ers and does an amazing job doing exactly that. And this is a guy who's gone on the road. He's gone to the Combine. He's gone to the Senior Bowl, and he's put eyes on a lot of the top prospects. And I thought, you know what? Let's get somebody really knowledgeable on here and chop it up. What's up, Brad? How are you?
Larry, doing great, and excited to talk about some prospects that are looking great out there at the NFL Combine.
Well, man, it's a really a pleasure to have you. Okay, so before we get into the players, Deebo, Samuel, to me, it made perfect sense when Barrows was reporting a couple weeks ago, hey, you know what? They're not going to trade this guy. They're going to cut him, except John Lynch had told us that they weren't going to cut him. And so then I was kind of torn. I mean, wait a second. John told us he wasn't going to cut him, but people say things for reasons. And now it seems like we're edging closer to a Deebo trade to either maybe Houston or Washington. Who knows what the compensation will be? What do you think? Are we reading this correct, or is there another wrinkle that's going to come out and ultimately they're going to be forced to release him and get nothing in return?
Well, history serves us correctly, Larry. I think back to that where Buffalo says goodbye to the media, and it looks like it's the end of his time with the 49ers. But what the 49ers had been saying consistently was they're not in the business of letting assets go for nothing, right? And they proved that by keeping Jimmy Garoppolo around throughout training camp, even if he wasn't practicing. And they were able to rework a deal to keep him around, and they did. And ultimately, Jimmy Garoppolo ended up playing that following year. And when he was able to go as an unrestricted free agent, the 49ers were able to recoup a fourth-round compensatory pick. So I do believe that the 49ers want to get something in return for Deebo Samuel. And based on some of the rumors that we're hearing out of the NFL Scouting Combine, it does sound like things are heating up. We saw Jordan Schultz report earlier today that the Commanders and the Texans are seemingly very interested in trading for Deebo Samuel. And obviously we understand the connections that Deebo has with both of those organizations. So, I've been of that mindset that I do believe the 49ers would be best off by trying to get something in return, because as I think we both understand, Larry, that $31 million dead cap hit is going to be around regardless of if it's a post-June 1st release or what have you. It just depends on where you want to take the brunt of that dead cap hit on. So if you're going to take it on, might as well get something in return. And if they can do that, then I think that would be the best case scenario for this situation.
The other day when John spoke publicly at the Combine, Chase Sr. asked him a direct question about Brandon Aiyuk, and he talked about, the need to get younger, and he could have easily just, put it to bed and just been like, yeah, Brandon Aiyuk's not going anywhere. He's going to be here. What's your guess? I mean, this is another weird one. I don't. Everything I know about the cap and about football tells me that Brandon Aiyuk cannot be traded right now, and I can't imagine there's any market for him. But there's whispers that there is a market for him, and John had the ability to basically say he's going to be here, and he didn't say that, and he kind of talked about getting younger, and I don't know. I'm getting vibes from the 49ers, like they maybe internally there may be some people in the building that didn't want Aiyuk back and weren't thrilled that he signed that contract. And I don't know. I mean, they don't seem. I mean, I don't know. What do you? What's going on with Aiyuk from your perspective, as you see it? For me, there's a lot of guesswork going on right now.
I mean, the off season is a great time for guesswork, and I think if I have to put that cap on, I'm always of the mindset that the NFL is a never say never league. Like whenever you think something can't happen, it seemingly does happen. And you also even can look across different sports and different sports leagues. Like, did anyone think Luka Doncic was going to get traded to the LA Lakers for that whole situation? And it's like, I just look at the situation as anything can happen. But when you really start to dive into it, you first have to approach the injury concerns that he has. We don't have a timetable for when we expect him to be back. And you look at kind of Talanoa Hufanga's ACL injury and when it occurred, and he didn't come back, I believe, until I think it was week 4 of last year. And we know with Aiyuk, he also tore his MCL. So there's another component to it with his injury. So I think timetable for return is in question. We don't know if he's going to be available for week 1. And then on top of that, the 49ers, gave him, quite the lucrative contract that they would be staring at what appears to be around a $40 million dead cap hit if they were to trade him prior to June 1st. Now, if there's some, and Larry, with the pre and post June 1st designations, you can adjust some things.
Right.
But when you look at the full picture of it all, you mentioned the value. Like, what value are you getting for a top-tier wide receiver that we just don't know where he's at currently in his rehab, what he will look like post-injury, will he return to form? Those are all questions that I think are valid when a player goes through that significant of an injury. So what does that translate in regards to value? What are you getting for Brandon Aiyuk after you have paid him the contract? So I'm sure the 49ers are open to listening to any conversation, as they say, quite often. But for me personally, I'm having a hard time seeing how it makes sense to really move off of Aiyuk at this particular time.
Yeah, no, it doesn't seem like it would. And it doesn't, it also seems a little bit too convenient, right? Hey, you sign him to this big contract. He gets hurt. It's a significant injury. He probably wouldn't pass a physical today if you wind up moving him. But what, there's another team out there that wants to give you attractive enough compensation for your broken wide receiver with this massive contract. It just seems like pie in the sky. One thing, though, that I always don't listen to what people say, watch what people do. And the Niners met with Trey Harris today from Ole Miss, who's a tremendous receiver. They also met with Omarion Hampton, a running back from North Carolina, who's, maybe the RB2 in this draft behind Genty. These are high second-round picks at wide receiver and running back. What do you make of that? Do you think they could go running back or wide receiver with their second-round pick? Because there's also a report from Tony Pauline that they really love Olufemi Oladejo and might take him in the second round. So what's your read on their plans?
Well, Larry, just like we were talking about, never say never, right? So you can you can never rule out an early running back. I know it's become a bit of an inside joke amongst 49er fans about 49ers taking a third-round draft pick. But in all honesty, this might be the draft to do that. Like you mentioned some of the names, but this is a really stacked running back class. And we don't know what the future necessarily holds for Jordan Mason, who's been a phenomenal back. I believe both you and I, Larry, were really high on him as an undrafted free agent. Once he had landed on the 49ers and really got into his tape, and you could really see right away what an impactful player he is. But being a restricted free agent, we know that things can be a bit fluid in that regard. So we don't know if they could be looking ahead towards the future and continuing to build that depth out. So running back could be an option on day 2. Absolutely. If the 49ers do indeed trade Deebo Samuel, you're then looking at a wide receiver room with just like we talked about, Brandon Aiyuk is TBD on if he will even be available for week 1. You got Ricky Pearsall heading into year 2. I think he showed a ton of promise and could definitely be a receiver you rely on. And then, Jawan Jennings was one aggressive block away from or almost getting to 1,000 yards last season, and we saw how that whole situation played out. So, but beyond that, you got Jacob Cowing, young, unproven, definitely a lot of talent there, but we're not really sure. So wide receiver, early, day 2, maybe even, do they go wide receiver at 11? I would say not likely, but again, you never know. And how the board shakes out and where the 49ers are likely putting their value in. So I could see a day 2 pick at wide receiver, day 3 pick at wide receiver, because they do need to add bodies to that room for sure, especially if Deebo Samuel is not on the roster next season as we are anticipating.
Who's your favorite wide receiver? I really love Luther Burden III from Missouri. To me, I see a lot of Deebo in him. I also see an East St. Louis kid that's just tough as hell. I mean, he's just so tough. You can't intimidate this guy. You can't hit this guy and make him, hear footsteps. I mean, this is a Jawan Jennings type tough guy. This is one of the toughest guys on your football team if you draft him. I love Burden, and I kind of like Trey Harris. I'm interested to see what Isaiah Bond runs. I think he may set the record, and I love what I saw out of the TCU kid Savion Williams. Who do you like, Brad, among the receivers? There's Tez. If you look at slot guys as well, do you have a favorite? McMillan from Arizona, played with Cowing. Cowing raves about him. Who's the best receiver in your mind? Who's the receiver you like?
Man, well, if we're going for the best, I would say McMillan is the one that jumps out to me, because I remember doing my tape work on Jacob Cowing last year, and I didn't know who McMillan was at this time. Watching number 4 make the most insane play after insane play, I'm like, it's McMillan, and of course, he is going to be likely a top 15 draft pick. But when you talk about catch radius and you talk about playmaking ability, McMillan just strikes me as one of those guys. And, Mike Evans was what the player comp that just kept flashing in my brain, because I remember, scouting Mike Evans coming out of Texas A&M and just how phenomenal of a jump ball athlete he was at high pointing it, and being able to bring down really difficult, all those different types of things. And McMillan really does remind me of a lot of other options. I mean, I know Jack Betch isn't going to be a physical type of specimen, but the wide receiver out of TCU, you mentioned his teammate. The first game, college game I covered last year was TCU versus Stanford. And Williams obviously was featured quite a bit, but the receiver and the player who stood out to me the most out of anyone was Jack. And being able to go full circle and then cover him at the Senior Bowl and watch him perform throughout the week and then in the game, he's one of those guys that you're not going to look at as these athletic freaks, but you just look at him and you're like, that's a football player. And as you know, Larry, one of the best compliments you can give a guy who plays this sport is just calling him a football player. Just he goes out there, does it the right way, has the heart, has the effort, and can really do it all. He's just a guy that really stands out to me. I don't know if he's going to be in the cards for the 49ers, but he's a guy that I've enjoyed kind of scouting throughout this process. And just one last name that I'll throw out, Jalen Royals out of Utah State. He strikes me as a pretty dynamic wide receiver who could be available kind of maybe day 2, maybe early day 3.
Yeah, a lot of people comparing Royals from Utah State to Deebo. Betch is an interesting kid. I mean, his brother unfortunately died in that New Orleans New Year's Day thing. His brother played, I believe, at Princeton, and he honored him during the Senior Bowl week. And you're right, Betch was kind of the story of Mobile. I mean, he caught the game-winning touchdown. He's just an easy guy to root for. He's tough as nails. There's bigger, stronger, faster receivers. He's 6'1", he's 214. He's not a burner, but he's tough, and you can tell. I mean, this guy, toughness and some of these things are hard to gauge, right? It's hard to gauge toughness. It's hard to gauge intellect sometimes, football intellect, that is. This guy's got it, right? This guy's incredibly tough, incredibly smart, very competitive. And then the other thing about football, it's painful. And some guys quit. Some guys stop playing hard, and you got to know who's in it to win it. Who's really there. Some guys it means a little bit to them. Some guys it means a lot to them. Some guys it means everything. And you want a whole team full of guys where it means everything. And I think to a guy like Jack Betch, it means everything. Yesterday we saw the big defensive lineman workout. I'll just ask you, who's your favorite? I mean, it's such a great D-line draft, Brad. We could talk D-line for the next 2.5 hours, and not hit all these guys. I mean, who jumped out? Who did you love in the D-line day?
It's hard to pick a favorite because there's so many, just like you mentioned. And I know you and me, Larry, we could go back and forth all day on this. But I thought one of the more impressive guys who kind of stood out to me at the Combine, at the Senior Bowl, was on my radar, but Jaw Joyner actually impressed me with his field drills. I mean, he ran at a top speed of 22.58 miles per hour, which ranked first out of any of the defensive linemen, which I was really impressed with. And when you look at all his top speed metrics, he's either first or second in all those categories. So Jaw Joyner stood out to me on the field in Mobile, but man, the testing that he put up, that's going to make me go back and really dive into his tape even further. The Minnesota defensive end prospect. But there's a bunch of guys, man. It's hard to pick. I really like Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I know you're a Ty Robinson guy. He had a phenomenal day out there.
Yeah, Nebraska. I like both those Nebraska guys, Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson. I mean, they're both nasty and kind of live to play, and you just can't run them up the middle on Nebraska.
Yeah, and so you can you get a little bit of pick your poison. Like, what are you looking for? Like, if you want to go 6'1", 300, Aeneas Peebles, extremely quick, explosive first step, get off. He has great pass rushing moves. I really enjoy watching him. Like I mentioned, Darius Alexander, he's an inside out guy. He can be your Charles Omenihu 2.0 type of defensive lineman. And then you go to all the way to the top, James Pierce Jr. just looked like an absolute freak out there, just running a 4.47 and just really showcasing his athletic ability. So that's another guy that obviously could be in range for the 49ers at pick 11. But if you go a little bit deeper down, a guy that stood out to me last year during draft prep, some of my favorite guys that I land on are when I study other guys. And then I'm like, wait a second, I came here for this person, but who is this guy? And Jordan Birch out of Oregon really stood out to me last year when I was doing, I think it was Dorless, the defensive tackle out of Oregon that came out last year. He really stood out to me with his athletic ability and his power. And he just is a guy that I am really intrigued by, and the list goes on and on. I'm a big fan of David Walker.
Central Arkansas. He's good. I even like that his teammate Shunderick Powell. I was talking about him last night, the receiver. But yeah, David Walker was coached by KJ Wright in Mobile, and I think that might have been a valuable experience for the Niners sending KJ there, because Olufemi and Walker and some of those edge pieces, you could see that he was in their ear. He was firing them up. He was getting excited when they were getting excited. I thought it seemed like maybe KJ Wright probably has some pretty good insight into those edge rushers, after working in Mobile.
Well, absolutely. He also coached up Landon Jackson, the Arkansas kid who jumped out the gym at the Combine, Mike Green, Jaw Joyner as well, like we already talked about. Donovan, he's a rookie. The Boston College kid that has a lot of burst off the edge. So, I do think that will be phenomenal insight. And one of my favorite things is it seemed like KJ was spending a lot of time with Femi Oladejo and David Walker. So I really like to see that. Those are two guys that, feel like they fit not only what the 49ers are looking for on the field, but also fit kind of that locker room vibe and really, good guys, high energy guys. And I think they would be great fits for the 49ers.
It's interesting too, Brad, because today the DBs worked out, and I saw an article a couple of days ago, and they were somebody was making comps to these prospects with guys that are in the league, and when it came time for Jedi Barron, they compared him to Brian Branch. And that's really Brian Branch, in my mind, is a player that the 49ers badly need. They need another, terrific natural defensive back who's violent, who hits, who covers, who makes big plays. Jedi Barron won the Thorpe Award. He was excellent this year at Texas. And then he worked out today at, 5'11", 195, ran 4.4 flat, looked amazing in the drills. To me, that guy's really special. And, what I love about the Lions and Brad Holmes, I think Brad Holmes is maybe one of the best doing it right now. They don't worry about like rankings and this and that. They target great players that they want, and then they pick them. So, everybody kind of made fun of the Lions a few years ago when they took Jahmyr Gibbs. Lions, running back, Jahmyr Gibbs. Well, ain't nobody laughing about that pick right now. All right. That pick's looking pretty good right now. So if the 49ers move back, I know they've got needs on the offensive line, but they could also really need, they could use another great defensive back to round out their secondary. And to me, I saw two great ones today, Barron from Texas and then Maxwell Hairston, who had a fantastic year at Kentucky. Then he goes to Mobile. I thought he was thoroughly dominating in the one-on-ones there. And then I think he ran 4.29 today. I mean, he is cooking. He's incredibly fast. He's very cocky, very confident. Man, Barron and Hairston, I know the Niners got a ton of needs elsewhere, but I'd be fine with either one of those guys being here.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Those are two names that absolutely stood out today with the DBs. I think another name that stood out to me that I have to go actually do more homework on is the South Carolina kid, Nick Amanwuri, ran a 4.38 I think he's like 6'3". Like, he's huge.
Right.
And he tested extremely well. The movement skills were clearly apparent. And from everything that I've heard about him, he's a big hitter. So that's a guy that I haven't done work on yet. But one of my favorite things about the Combine, Larry, is even if you haven't done the tape work yet, you can pick and pull traits from these guys to be like, okay, I can see how that will translate to the next level. Let me go see if that's on tape. Let me go see when I throw it on, we'll see those same things with pads on, because both you and I know, Larry, that you can look like a warrior without any pads on, and then all of a sudden the pads come on and that guy disappears. And the last guy that you would expect to be balling out is going crazy. So football is always such an interesting sport in that way. And that's why I love the Combine, is because maybe some guys that I haven't watched yet, I now have kind of a baseline traits pool, and now we can hop into the tape and see if the tape matches. And that's always my favorite, is when you kind of reverse engineer the scouting process, when you're like, oh, that guy looks pretty solid in field drills, and then you go into the tape and you're like, oh, wow, looks even better on film. Or sometimes you get into the film and you're like, actually, I expected more. And so it's one of the reasons why I love the Combine. And I personally get so much out of it is because, man, it's one of the only places outside of the Senior Bowl where you get all these guys in one place, and you can literally compare them back to back to back to back. And there's so much great information to come out of it. I really do enjoy it.
I got to ask you about the O-line before we get out of here. Offensive tackle. I mean, tomorrow's Brad Graham Day at the Combine. You're a former offensive lineman. Who do you like? I kind of like Membu from Missouri. He's like kind of my favorite guy. I kind of like Anthony Belton and Emory Jones on day 2. I think I'd rather see the Niners wait to day 2 for the offensive line and go with Anthony Belton or Emory Jones. And I really, really love some of the guards. That Marcus Ware from Montana State, one of my favorite players. Willie Lampkin from North Carolina, one of my favorite players. Tyler Booker and Donovan Jackson, I think, are both excellent guards. But you got a great eye for this. So you tell me who give me an offensive lineman or two that really stand out to you, Brad.
Well, Will Campbell is my number one offensive lineman in this class, and that happened really early on for me. It's really easy to tell. It's not a super top-heavy class, but outside of him, I think we talked about him as well prior. Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, really excited to see how he's going to test. He's right now kind of a fringe first-rounder. He's a guy that has only just elevated his stock throughout this process, but I have these dreams of him somehow sliding out to the 49ers at the top of the second, and they somehow snatch him up, and then he's plug-and-play starter for me. Day one, you talked about Membo. He kind of reminds me of Zach Tom a little bit, a guy that I was really high on, but other players that I'm going to be looking for, Jackson Slater, the Sacramento State kid. Marcus Embo out of Purdue is an intriguing prospect to me. I want to kind of learn more about him, so that's one guy that I'll also be on the eye out for. And Ursary out of Minnesota. He's kind of a bigger tackle, and I'm trying to decide if I like him at tackle or guard. Right now I'm trending towards guard, but if he can come out and show well in the short shuttle and show his lateral quickness and ability, then I would feel better about keeping him at tackle. But those are a couple names out there that I'm looking forward to seeing.
Old lineman hit the surface tomorrow. Day 3 of the combine, and Niners need some offensive linemen. So if you're a Niner fan, if you want to watch the combine, you got 5 extra hours to see offensive linemen in spandex do their drills. You'll learn something. Brad, I always learn a ton when we have you on, man, and we really appreciate you. SF Niners on YouTube, on Instagram, on X. Tell people how they can find you other than that, and we appreciate you doing it. Hopefully we'll get a chance to wrap with you again before April.
Yeah, appreciate you, Larry, having me on. You could find me at the SF Niners pretty much on any social media platform, or if you want to follow my personal X account at Graham_SFN. And as always, Larry, I could talk ball with you forever. So I appreciate you having me on.
Hey, man, we'll do it again. The hour goes fast. Brad Graham stopping by on the Human Guest Line. All right, we're going to take a time out. Up next, we're going to tell you, maybe we'll do a trivia question. Do you know, our 49er stat of the day, what position has been drafted the most by the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch regime? They took over in 2017. So 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Those are their drafts. In those drafts, what position have the Niners drafted the most